A birth is the first defining moment in our lives, the first step in the journey to becoming who we are. But for those who are adopted, that moment is shrouded in secrecy. That is, until now. In Minnesota, a new law changes that starting July 1st, 2024.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. In the crush of the 2022-2023 legislative session, one bill that will be life-changing for adoptees passed with little notice. The law is simple. It allows adoptees the right to access their birth certificates, even if the birth parents declared they never wanted to be contacted. Birth certificates contain the names of the birth parents, adopted person's name at birth, the place of the birth, and possibly additional details about the birth. It's a law adoption advocates have been fighting for decades, and it makes Minnesota one of only 15 states to give adoptees the right to their birth records. Tonight you will hear from an 82-year-old adoptee who believes this law will finally allow her to find family members. And you'll hear from a birth mother that gave up her child. But first, let's start with an adoptee who is an attorney and leader in the fight for adoption rights. Well, joining us right now is Greg Luce, and he has many titles. He actually has a podcast called What's Next, the Adoptee Rights Podcast. He is also with the Adoptee Rights Law Center and the executive director of Adoptees United. Did I get them all in?
You did, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, good to be here.
Let me ask you, you were one of the driving forces behind this law in Minnesota. What does this law actually do that goes into effect July 1st, 2024?
What it does is actually pretty simple. It means that an adopted person who was born in Minnesota at age 18 or older can apply for their original birth record like everybody else can, and within a few weeks after paying the small fee, they'll get a copy of their original birth record, often listing who gave birth to them and who were their biological parents.
What if their name was changed?
Well, if their name was changed, that's gonna, if you're interested in searching for them and finding them, then you'd have to figure out how it was changed and what it was changed to.
Okay. So
But if you know, and I'm sure a birth mother on an original birth record probably married later and changed the name, but typically with all the records that exist out there, it's not that hard to find.
Well, I was wondering if the adoptee had a different name now.
Oh, so the way it works is that you would apply for the record under your adoptive name, and the Vital Records Department in Minnesota has that record matched up. So as long as you know your adoptive name, which I'm sure you do, they will match up that adoptive name to the original birth record and then pull that original birth record and provide it.
Now, the Vital Records, you said it's Vital Records for the state of Minnesota, is that what you were saying?
Correct, yeah.
If an adoptee goes right now before this law goes into effect and asks for that vital record of their name change, can they get it?
Very unlikely. I mean, there is an availability in certain circumstances in which a birth parent has already given permission to release it, but there's very few of those.
Okay, and this changes that.
Yes, there's no need for birth parent permission to get your own record.
What if the birth parent really doesn't want to have contact or be contacted?
So there are a kind of a number of provisions that are in the new law that help with that. And one is this contact preference form that birth parents have been able to file since last August. And on that form, a birth parent has three choices. And these are choices that are communicated to the adopted person when they get their birth record. And that is, I would like to be contacted, I prefer contact, I prefer to be contacted, but I'd like to use an intermediary, or I prefer that I not be contacted. And they can also write in a box on the form any other information they feel that the adopted person may feel is important to know.
Okay. Yeah. But they'll have the name, so they can reach out if they want.
Correct. Yeah, they'll have the name. They can reach out if they want to. Some do, some don't. And some find out that their birth parent is deceased.
Okay, Minnesota is just the 15th state to adopt such a law. You yourself are adopted, and you were able to find your birth parents through a old-fashioned registry, and also you actually wanted your own birth certificate. You're an attorney, and you went through the appellate process in Washington, D.C. If you hadn't been an attorney, how much do you think that process would have cost you?
My process, because it was in the trial court and then got appealed to the appellate court and then back down, would have cost $30,000 at least in
Wow.
attorney's fees to get one single piece of paper.
What did it mean to you to be able to know your birth father, who you just apparently are corresponding with, but to know who your birth mother was, to actually meet her? What does that do to a person, do to you?
Essentially, as you asked that question, I started to tingle thinking through it, because it's so meaningful to know that you were born to this person, your mother, and you may know who your birth father is. And the only way I know how to describe it is the first time I knew that this was a person that lived on this earth, I felt tethered to the earth at that point. And many adoptees talk about this, where they don't know this sort of black hole in their life. They feel untethered. Some explain it as floating around and not being part of the society and the earth that they stand on. And so knowing that information made that immediately tethered to the earth for me. And then the other thing that was really important to me was to get the actual record. So that's a verification of that.
Well, Greg, this is just fascinating stuff. And again, I assume people will tune into your podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Up next, an 82-year-old woman explains why, because of this law, she believes she'll finally be able to find members of her birth family. And also hear from a birth mother who welcomes the new law. Joining us right now is Mary Jo Lindeberg. She has graciously shared her time and also her age. She's 82 years old, and you were actually adopted back in 1942. You were born 1941, New Year's Eve, and
Yes.
you've been looking for your birth mother
Much
all
of this
these
time.
years.
Yes.
Tell us about that journey.
Well, it actually starts when I, as an infant or as a young child, ask you about the age of 10. I began to say, well, I know I'm adopted, Mom, and I've always known that, but what can you tell me about the woman who gave birth to me? And I got a story that she probably thought was going to answer all my questions and I wouldn't ask again, when she said, well, your mom died giving birth to you and your father, it was just 25 days after Pearl Harbor, and they expected that he would be drafted shortly. So I heard that story, and for years that was all I knew. And
And somehow you found out that was not true.
I found that out, that it was not true. In 1993, my church bulletin had a little ad on the back of it once. I remember seeing it. It said, Catholic services trying to find adoption information, contact this number in St. Paul. Well, I did. And they dove into the records, and it turns out she had signed this agreement for non-disclosure, which meant that I could not find out her name until 100 years had passed from my birth.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
That was the way it was set up at that point.
All right. And
And
you think that you know that she went to a home for quote
for
unwed
unwed mothers, yeah.
Okay.
I can tell you a good deal more about the background if you'd like to hear
Well,
about that.
what was this home for unwed mothers? Because I think younger people aren't going to be familiar with a term like
the very idea that, yeah, I've tried to find where it might conceivably have been. And because I know I was born in St. Paul and I know it was a Catholic institution, I tried to find, well, are there still these homes? And if so, were they in business in 41? And I couldn't find anything.
What does this law mean to you? What are you going to do on July 1st?
On July 1st, well, the meeting that we're going to a meeting the night before for all the other adoptees that have been hopefully trying to find information out, and their loved ones. And they're going to have notaries there that will help us complete the official forms, and things will proceed. And I don't know how long it will take for this information to come.
And you have the right to access your mother's name, and it sounds like there are records there to document it.
I do have a number of records. When I first contacted Catholic Services, they said that they had information about her and her family and reasons why she might not have wanted to disclose the actual name. And I know that she was 28 years old. She wasn't a teenager. She lived in Montana, someplace in Montana. She was the oldest of 8 children, 3 girls and the rest, of course, all boys. And her mother came from someplace in Minnesota, and when she met her father,
Was she
he
met?
was of Irish Catholic.
Okay.
My mother's father was very Irish Catholic, and the birth mother converted to Catholicism.
Okay, let me ask if I
Yes.
can, because we're running out of time. I just, obviously, your birth mother is not alive. She was 28.
No, of course not.
Yeah, but are you going to be hoping to reach out to relatives? You could have had siblings
I would
all over the
love
place.
I'd love to know if there are any people alive that look like me. That was the question that I always wanted. There must be somebody out there. And I know that after going through ancestry and all that sort of thing, I know that I'm Irish and Norwegian for the most part.
All right.
So,
And that's, so you are going to look for other relatives. Well, we
yes,
certainly wish you all the luck in your journey, because you certainly deserve it. You also get it for health reasons too. Will that be helpful?
it would. At
Yeah.
82, I figure my children are healthy, so I must not be passing too much on that's bad for them. And
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
feeling
and you
well, so
look,
that's good too.
yeah, you certainly look healthy. Well, Mary Jo, thank you so much for sharing your story. We're going to follow up with you when you
Good.
do find out the information.
That would be great.
Well, joining us right now is Pat Glisky, and her story is that of a birth mother. Thank you so much, Pat, for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. Why don't you tell us your story about putting your child up for adoption in the 1960s?
Well, in the 1960s, if you found yourself pregnant, you, and if you weren't getting married, the norm was to relinquish your child. You either went to unwed mother's home or a wage home, or you were sent away to a relative. And because it brought a lot of shame to your family, and your reputation was not good. So you went away and you disappeared for a number of months, and then you came back home, and you were told to go on with your life and just forget about it. And
That must have been what was that like for you inside?
well, at the time, that's what society was acceptable. So you sort of did that, but it was to be carrying a child and to know you're not going to be able to raise that child. It's very difficult.
Well, and your son found you even without the help of that law. How has that been for you and your son when he finally? How many years later did he find you?
He found me. He was born in 1965, and he found me in 2009. And
Wow.
I received a letter that he had done some research, and he sent a letter looking for me and wanting to make sure I was the right person and that type of thing. And so when I got the letter, actually my friend got the letter first. There was who I had stayed with, and it was like, oh wow. I was like, you're kind of like numb. It's an out of body experience type thing. It's something you've probably been waiting for your whole life and thought about, but you were told they were, you could never find each other. So when you get a letter like that, you go, oh, wow. And you're
And
numb and you go, okay, what do I do now? And for me, it was like a relief that he finally found me, because now I could really share him with everybody, but now I had to figure out how I was going to tell everybody
okay.
about this person that had existed in my life that no one knew about.
And this has been a very happy, positive situation for both you and he, right?
Yes, our reunion has been very positive,
Okay.
and
Well, let
he
me ask
actually
you.
lives in the state of Texas, and he and his family come to spend a week or two every year, which has been really wonderful because I've gotten to watch his children grow up. I mean, they're young adults now, but
That's
so
great.
it's been good, and we visited there, so it's been very positive for us. But that's not true for
Yeah,
everybody.
well, let me ask you, this law is going to help an awful lot of people who weren't able to connect. And a lot of birth mothers, when this happened, they signed agreements that they didn't want the person to get in touch with them. How do you think birth mothers are going to react? Because presumably a lot more birth mothers out there in Minnesota are going to hear from children that they gave birth to.
Well, I think what's happened with DNA, I think a lot of birth parents have been found through DNA. And
Okay.
that's kind of, so this law being passed doesn't necessarily mean that every adoptee wants to find their birth parent. They just want to know who they are. And because that validates them as an adoptee, if they can get this original birth certificate, that's their first legal document that you've ever had in your life. So, but that's the number of birth parents that don't want to be reunited or found is very minimal. It's a
Really?
very small percentage.
Well, listen, Pat, you've been great. I appreciate so much your sharing your story with us.
Great. I'm happy to share it. I didn't think so years ago, but now it's a relief, and I want, and it's not devastating, and it just, you can't have enough people in your life that care and love you. So
That's a wonderful way to put it. Up next, a leader in the fight for adoption rights on what's next for adoptees. Well, joining us right now is Penny Needham. She is a board member for the Minnesota Coalition for Adoption Reform. She's been fighting now for 40 years for adoption reform, and she herself is an adoptee. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Esme.
You were able to find your birth parents in the 80s through kind of a series of good luck incidents, basically, and you were able to get your birth certificate. What was it like to find your birth parents? What did that do to you?
I think adoptees share a need like every human being does to know who you are and where you came from. It's the question that we all struggle with. It's the task of adolescence, actually, to figure out your own identity. And adoptees have this cloudy view. They don't have a full picture. You're not sitting across the table from someone that you recognize as a relative. They are your parents, and it's a wonderful family. And there's this other piece that says, well, where did you come from before that? There's a history you don't have.
And let me ask you, because you brought that up, for the adoptive parents, some people might see this as a slight on the adoptive parents. What is the reality as far as you're concerned?
Um, my father was always supportive, and he kept notes from the adoption agency about my non-identifying information, should I ever choose to find out more. My parents were supportive of me, and it was a nice situation to be able to share with them my journey of figuring out who I was. My father, when I told him I was looking, said, I wondered when you were going to do this, and I wondered why your birth mother didn't do it first.
Well, let me ask, can you just share your story about your birth parents? Because it's really a poignant one, and you actually have a whole family of whole sisters that you've been able to meet. You can just explain what happened.
Well, everyone has their version of this story. My version is that I was able to connect with my birth family um, over a time when it was a surprise to them too. They didn't know that I would be able to find them. My birth parents were told to put it behind them and go on with their life, which they did separately. And then as after a year of college, my birth mother said, I really want to marry this man who wants to marry me, and let's do it. So they got married, and they had 4 more daughters after that. And nobody knew the secret of the adoption at that point. It took my searching for my birth records and my wanting to know who I was and where I came from for them to have permission to talk about it.
Penny, what should adoptees or perhaps adoptive parents or birth parents, what should they do now that this law is about to go into effect? Is it, and they want more information, they want to find their birth certificate. How is it going to work? What should they do?
Well, I think you have to decide if you want a relationship, and relationships take some work. It's not just because you're related that you have a relationship. Marriages are the same way. You you have a desire to know someone and get to be with them, but you also have each of you has a responsibility in the relationship to make it a good one. So get support on how to do that. Talk with other adoptees. Birth parents also have an organization called Concerned United Birth Parents, and they can support each other in their journeys of post-adoption.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@cbs.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. on CBS News Minnesota. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.